So, quick introduction. My name is Subramaniam Iyer. I am one of the co-presidents of Kiritsu Forum, which is the largest angel network in the world, and you probably know my colleague Rajan Shrikant better than you know me. So, he's my partner. A bit of history about the business model canvas workshop. You know, I think I presented the first one, Vishy, 9 years ago, I think, when Vishy was still ED of time. So, this is how it happened, right? There was a book that was written by Osterwalder and Pignia. It was called the Generating Business Model, right? So, before the value proposition canvas, if you think about it, it should have come the other way. But they came out with a book called Business Model Canvas first, yeah, on which I developed a training workshop, which I first ran at Cognizant because of Vishy. That's 9 years ago, I think, right? So how I would have presented 9 years ago and how I present it today is going to be completely different because, maybe active investments for the last 4 years, including failures and hopeful successes, right? I probably know a lot more about how to really apply it, right? So I almost don't go back to any of the examples in the books. In any case, they are dated, because it was written 9 years ago. Now, the same guys, plus a few others, and it was a co-created book, they came up with a second book called Value Proposition, right? And which is why you have two canvases. You have the Value Proposition canvas, and then the business model canvas, right? So even though they publish, whenever I used to do these talks in the past, I used to talk about business model first and then come to value proposition. Today I'm going to talk the other way around because you have to start at value proposition, right? And when you talk about value proposition, there is something extremely important. It's called fit. Okay, so that's where I'm going to start, right? And I'm going to refer to 5 examples. And the reason for the 5 examples, these are 5 companies I'm intimately familiar with because I put in real money. Some of them the money is stuck or not coming back, right? So you learn the most with failures, okay? Right? So you could say I am perhaps a couple of $1 billion wiser for having made mistakes. But anyway, so that's it. Right? And these are the 5 companies. SG stands for Singapore because I'm third generation Singaporean. I'm born bred in Singapore. And IN stands for India, obviously. So some of these companies, there were transitions, and we'll talk a little bit more when I talk to them as the examples. Okay, so the agenda for today. Okay, I'm going to start with, even before we get to the canvas, right, what does it take to succeed? Right? So we'll start with a few basics. I mean, you may see basics, there are only 3 things, but interestingly, those 3 things is going to drive your success. Okay? All right, then we'll talk about the value proposition canvas, right, which is items 2 and 3, and then we talk about the business model canvas, right, which is items 4 and 5. If we have time, we go into 6. It's not really that important for this. But just to give you an idea how you transition from business model to actually writing a proper business plan, and then we'll go to Q&A. We don't need to wait till the end for questions. We could talk along the way. What I think may be useful with these canvases is if you have a startup, to start writing down whatever comes to your mind about your startup, right? I mean, you need a full canvas to actually, a full workshop to go through something like that. But it may be worthwhile making some rough points which you could take to an eventual workshop and then sort of say, did I meet it, right? Did I meet it? Okay. So what's required for success? Anyone want to venture a guess? Customer or a market? Innovative ideas?
Continuous improvement process.
Sorry, continuous?
Improvement process.
Continuous improvement, of course, that almost sounds like GE. Right? I almost won't associate it with startup, but of course when you scale, You need continuous improvement, of course.
Demand is also similar to
Demand, so customer, yeah. The market,
good team,
good team, yeah.
fund.
Money, of course, right? What can you do without money? Okay, so I'll try and bring all of these ideas into these 3 points, right? If there is anything that you take away today, it's these 3 points, okay? Now, all these, okay, I don't need you all to take too much slides. The slides are already given to the to the team, so they will distribute it to you. I don't like the idea of you having slides when I'm talking, because I'd rather you listen to me than and write down whatever's on the slides, right? So, but if you desperately need the information on the slides, I mean, the organizers can distribute the slides to you, right? So that's not the thing. You can take down points which, something that I mentioned or a story that I'm telling, which is not on the slide, right? That may be useful, right? And for which you've got your canvas or your notebooks or whatever. Okay, fit. To be honest, I could speak an hour on this, but we don't have time, so we will speak for this. Right? We talked about innovative idea. Okay? So if you think about it, an innovative idea is nothing but thinking about a fit on a platform. Right? There is a problem and you have a solution. Right? So let me take my example number 2. Right? It's a company I invested in, $200,000, which not sure where it's going. Right? So this was what we call effective microorganisms that improve the yield of crops. Okay? Right? There's a problem, right? Farmers are saying there's no yield, not enough. And if you think about it, there is a solution. You use effective microorganisms, and it's not new technology, it's Japanese technology going back 80 to 100 years. Right? So again, the technology exists. Right? So there is a problem, and there appears to be a solution. Right? If that's all you have, it's only on paper. Okay? So while you need innovative ideas, that's fine, that's where you start, right? You start with a problem statement and then what is your solution, right? And in our case, there was a partner of ours who was already making this stuff in Bombay, and we took the rights to distribute it outside India. That's all, right? Simple trading proposition, right? There is a problem, there's a solution. Or we thought there was a problem, right? And there appears to be a solution. So second thing that you do with this is, we had phenomenal success, particularly with cocoa, right? Cocoa is a diseased crop. It suffers from fungal diseases, whether it's in Southeast Asia or whether it's in South America. There are 4 major locations in which cocoa is grown. Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, West Africa and Brazil, right? So 4 locations, and wherever you go, it suffers from fungal diseases. And here I have a product that actually deals with it. Of course, we are not limited to cocos, and we had a market product fit. And actually, there were the Indonesian media, right? TVI, actually filmed 2 of our phenomenal successes. We tripled the yield of onions and one other crop, I can't remember, I think it was paddy. Okay? So we tripled the yield of these 2 crops, right? So if you think about it, this is a company that seems to be solving a problem. So there is a paper fit, right? On paper there's a fit. There seems to be a market fit, right? Because the product actually worked in the market. And actually our pilot farmer went from being in debt to building a house, right? And expanding his farm 3 times. So if you think about it, it was very successful for him, right? But we never made money, right? So this is where that you could have a paper fit, a market fit, but if you don't have a business model fit, you will never make money, right? So that's why we say it's in the bank when there is a business model fit. Okay? I am not here to say I know all the reasons why we didn't have a business model fit, right? I mean, the problem is it was one entrepreneur running around in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, right? It wasn't a team, right? It was one person trying to solve all the problems, market all of it, right? And you could say, why did I stick with that for as long as I did? I stuck with that for about 10 years. I mean, I stopped funding it after 8 years, but stuck with it for 10 years. Why? Because in between, we actually got $3 million, Singapore dollars, $3 million from a customer, one single customer. Why would somebody pay if there was no business model fit, right? Which is why we couldn't think beyond that to say there was something amiss in our business model, right? So just park this example in your head, because we will go back to thinking about it when we talk about the business model canvas. I want to take another example, and which you should all be familiar with, because you're all part of the IT incubator, which is item number 1. Because I ran an accelerator, right? Now, the second one, even though as I said we didn't succeed, I haven't given up on it, right? I will think of a different model, or I'll think of a different business model to still find a solution, because my partner is still happy to help me, right? So I might think of it, or I might go to market in a different way, okay? Right? Because you go rethink your business model and see if there's another way to do it, right? So my first 2 of my failures, my next 3 are hopeful successes, right? So the first one is an accelerator incubator, right? You all understand accelerators, incubators, right? You sit in one. What does it make for an accelerator or incubator to succeed? What do you think?
They start up to be success.
What?
They start up to be achieve success.
That's right, right? The customers are you guys, right? You are the startups and you are the customers, right? So who are the people who, and how do they make money? How do they succeed? Or what is success for an incubator? Exits on it, yeah, if the startup
And then giving exit to
and giving an exit, and that's how the accelerator makes some money, okay? Right? But just imagine if you are an incubator and you're helping startups, right? IT is unique, right? It's funded by somebody else. This is not the core funding for IIT, right? They can wait 20 years before they have some success and take some money out of it. But if you are a commercial accelerator, can you succeed? When you have institutions competing with you? It's a very interesting question, right? There are still several accelerators in India, right? I would tell you in Singapore, almost all of them are shut, including the one that, and the only reason I ran mine was I got 70% of the money back from the government, right? So even if I invest $1 million, 700,000 is back. So there was always downside protection to my loss, and which is why I dared to try. And this was at a period of time before we started Kiditsu, right? So again, this is shut, this is completely shut, I'm never going back into this business, never, right? Okay, so the question is, why will it, is there any chance for the accelerator business, right? Think of the fits, right? Think of the fits. Is there a chance for them to succeed, right? Can they ever make a business model thing?
The Springboard is making money.
Sorry?
Springboard, there is a private
Private thing.
they are making money.
They are making money. How are they making money, right?
So they are actually in institution, they restrict that they what type of startup they are going to do. But in Springboard they don't restrict. Even if somebody is opening gym or something also,
They
will
accept.
restrict. Yeah,
Okay.
they will, yeah.
So who's paying that? Are they making money out of exits, or are they having cash, or
Rent.
somebody is bankrolling them?
Rentals and the facility what they provide through that only they are.
Okay. So think about this for a time being, right? If you're going to make money out of rent of the premises, the people coming there, right? What would it take, right? If you were paying commercial rent for that place and then you're giving it to startups at lower rent, will you ever make money? Alright? And think of money, making money in the short term as well as the right? Making money in the short term versus the long term. Right? So sometimes we know we make money from the exits. The exit's not going to come till much later. But in between, how do you survive? Who's supporting you if it's not an institution? So you need someone to bankroll it. Right? So sometimes there may be a business model there, but it's not going to come very quickly. Right? You need to be bankrolled for a period of time, and that is true in my mind about accelerators. Right? If they have somebody who can bankroll it, for example, they may be giving out the facility and making rent because somebody wants it. Right? And they don't have to worry about the cost of it. Right? So the economics comes into play, and I never thought of economics very much in the business model thing. I mean, you sort of thought about it, but I never used to think about it as to what you need from a business model in the short term versus what you need in a business model in the long term. Okay? I would tell you a story about, and again I'm exposed to accelerators. I ran one in Singapore and I've shut. There was an accelerator called Murudi, and Murudi was funded by the Australian telecoms, Telstra, right? Telstra funded the accelerator, and they've now shut in Singapore. Okay, so it tells you something about how difficult it is to run a commercial accelerator or an incubator, right? Because if the bulk of your earnings is only going to come from exits, right? I will tell you two accelerators, non-institution based accelerators that are actually succeeding. Okay? First one is a Canadian accelerator. The name skips me. It's been a few years since I was in Canada. It is an accelerator that was started by someone who owns a telecom business in Canada. Okay? Now, he decided that he will support an accelerator, but they were very specific about who will come into the accelerator. So they decided first, right? You're a telecom company, you've got sales guys going to all sorts of customers. They asked these customers, what are some of your other problems that we could solve? So what do they do first? They first establish whether there is a potential to make money first. And they only incubated that type of companies. So they minimized the risk of failure. They had the money to bankroll this because they were very successful in their telecom business. And then they went into the accelerator. So that seems to be very strategic. It's not just wishful thinking going into an accelerator and thinking that you are able to pick the winners. They didn't pick the winners, they asked their customers. They asked their customers. And even then, some of the companies in the accelerator would fail, it didn't matter. Right? They had a higher chance of success, and that was commercially successful. Okay. The second accelerator I want to talk about, and you can Google this, it's called Entrepreneur First, EF. Entrepreneur First started in London. Okay? And the Entrepreneur First model is different. They had a kind of a hackathon with PhD and master students. Okay? They focused on technology, something that would break the mold of what exists in the market. And the hackathon wasn't a 2-day thing. It literally 3 months, right, with these people. Some of them will fail and drop out. Some of them would merge their ideas and come up with a solution. And they have been successful because one of their companies exited at a phenomenal valuation. So they had a lot of money, right? So what do they do when they have a lot of money? They started a second accelerator in Singapore. And they did the same. And at Kiritsu Singapore, we evaluated some of these companies. And we found that if we give those companies a period of 3 to 6 months after they graduated from the accelerator, they actually looked like some of the companies actually had revenue traction and could potentially grow the business. They have now decided that they're going to expand to a few other geographies like Hong Kong and a few other places. My fear immediately is they're going to fail. Right? Some of these businesses is really hard to manage. So going back to thinking about it, there's a problem, there's a solution, but if you don't take it down to a business model fit, you never make money. And once the money runs out, you're out of business. Right? It's the example that I gave about the effective microorganisms business. Once I stopped funding it, it was dead. right? And I gave it more than enough time. Okay? So it's important, whatever you take away today, these 3 points you need to take away, right? When you start evaluating your businesses, right? Very often you'll be prototyping at the second level, whether there's a market, there's a product, and you think you've arrived and you've got a very successful business. Answer is you don't. Most of the time, even when you are funded by angels or angel networks like ourselves, you don't have business model fit, right? And I say this because we have some tough negotiations on valuation. People think they are worth a lot, but forget that you are only at the product fit stage, market fit stage. You're not at the business model fit stage, right? There is still a lead. Many of those companies, even get funded at that stage, could fail because you find that you don't have a business model, right? You may have it on paper, but you're not quite ready there. Okay, so as a businessman, the business plan never survives your first customer contact, right? So you can have the best possible plan on paper. It's not going anywhere until you have actually seen your customer. And I think seeing the customer in more than just interviewing the customer, right, or getting a survey, right, that tells you a little bit, but it doesn't tell you a lot. Until you go knock the door and say, it's 10 rupees, please pay, then you know whether the customer is really there or not, right? Because then it tells you whether the customer sees value in what you're offering. I mean, they may before said, sounds like a good idea, I mean, generally the culture in India is never to tell you to your face that it's bad, right? Everything encouraging, bhakla, it's okay, yeah, sounds good, all that kind of stuff, right? So until you really try and sell and try and collect money, you often don't know whether your business model is there, right? And given all my discussion earlier, it is the business model stupid, right? So it often comes down to business model, right? And sometimes it takes time to figure out what about the business model works and what about it doesn't work. Okay? So when you're thinking through business model, think of alternatives, right? What are alternatives, right? I sell the product to the person, right? Or if I have an equipment, maybe I lease it to the customer. They're happy to pay small amounts every month rather than buy $100,000 piece of equipment. And these are some of the things that we toy with. In the third example that I get is where we build simulators for orthopedic surgery, right? And we actually got a decent amount of money from Johnson & Johnson. Still, they didn't buy in volumes. Okay, so we had to pivot the business model and work with the Singapore hospitals, right, for residency programs, right? So this happens all the time, right? Business model is never static. Sometimes some things doesn't work. You have to pivot and see if you can make it work, right? And remember, a business model, while you're going through this exercise, is on paper, right? So going back to my example of a simulator, right? Johnson & Johnson paid us $500,000, not small amount, $500,000. And we developed a product which was way ahead. They were thrilled with it. They took it to Japan, to their people in Japan. And you know how the Japanese people, when they get excited, they all chatter, right? It was that exciting an equipment for them. They only bought 2 pieces, even though they had a memorandum of understanding with us to pick up 10 pieces, right? And after that, they said they want to get out of the contract. Of course, they're a big guys, right? A $1 billion company, I'm a startup, I'm not going to fight with them, right? So we had to pivot the business model. And you can imagine what kind of stress that puts on a startup, right? Because the money is used, right? And where do you find the money, the extra money to pivot the business model? Fortunately, we found an investor who came in, and the investor said, can you mentor my son? So actually, he turned out to be quite good, right? So we are also grooming him to be the next CEO. And we said we will need more money. And so we made a decision to take the company public in the Australian Stock Exchange. And you can ask me why Indian company that became a Singapore company and I'm going to the ASX It's because ASX is the only company that would accept loss-making companies with a valuation of 15 million and more. If I had to do the equivalent in Singapore, I need 80 million or more in valuation, and I know I won't hit 80. And 15 million, the brokers that we've spoken to are saying no problem. In fact, it will be more than 15. Right? So I have a 2-year horizon. I need to work backwards on what I need to achieve for them to give me that valuation. Right? So again, having gone through the problem of raising money, we sort of said, medtech requires money, and this is a simulator, right? And if I have a listing, I'm not limited to sticking with what we are good at, which is orthopedics. We can buy other simulators, right? Why can't I be in any of the other fields, right? Right now we're in orthopedic, we could be in n number of fields, and I would use the listing currency, right? My shares as an acquisition price, right? And as we say, it's okay to dilute, right? 100% of 0 is still 0, but 5% of 1 billion is still worth a lot of money, right? So that's the reason we say we will dilute, but at least we can create value and live to fight, and create some valuable business, right? So, of course, you don't want to dilute too quickly, but sometimes as a founder team, you have to accept reality. I mean, if you think about how Sachin Bansal made money, right? It's a dilution and the exits, right? That's how they got money to invest. Okay. And of course, the conventional wisdom, don't build a business until you've verified your business model, right? What does verified mean? You actually have gone to market, right? You've gone to market, you've tried it, people actually bought it, paid you good money, right? So, but of course the problem with business models, and taking the example of my simulator business, we sold the machines not at cheap price, $75,000 to Johnson & Johnson, and that was a discounted price because they gave us $500,000 development monies. They bought 2 units, and still the business model was stuck because they changed their mind. Big organizations are a bit of a big, right? B2B sales, especially enterprise sales, for those of your startups that engage with enterprise sales take time, right? And the most important thing to remember, anything takes more time than you think. Okay, moving on. Any questions before I move to the next section? Very proposition. Okay, my first 2 slides are really the most important slides. The rest of it I'm going to run through because the only way you will digest them is by working through an example in a workshop, right? And you don't have time for that. And I want to have sufficient time for Q&A, right? Okay. Okay, so in the value proposition canvas, if you sort of pick at it, you've got 2 things, right? How do you match your value proposition to the customer segment, to the customer? Right? So this is where you start. You don't start with the business model. You have to start with, do I have an offering that customer actually wants? Right? So first you have to define what is your customer segment. If you got a B2C product, right, because this is a mass market product. I have this same slide later, but I use different terminology. Right? If you're going to the mass market is a B2C, right? And there are a few things about B2C, right? Brand building is not a cheap exercise, for example, right? Do you have the ability to raise that level of money, right? All of that becomes very important considerations when you do a B2C. Or is there some way that you can reach that customer segment without that kind of brand building cost, right? And it really depends on your business, right? So the reason you need to define your customer segment is because your whole business model will change depending on which market that you are targeting, okay? B2B, obviously, you're selling to the business, right? The issue with B2B is often enterprise sales take a long time. Businesses often take a long time to decide, and bigger businesses, like my example with Johnson & Johnson, are so fickle that they can change their mind. And why did they change their mind? Because the team that was there went out. Because they had a huge issue in India. Right? They had a huge issue in India, and they managed it so badly, right, that they're now looking to go and hire someone else to replace that person, and nobody wants the job. Right, so this was political, right? Right, and big organizations have these billion-dollar companies have got all kinds of problems, right? So the people who supported us continue to support us, but they're no longer there, right? Which is not helpful for me as a startup, right? I mean, I wish they had taken 20 units, 100 units, and I would have no issue or no need to even raise a next round of money, right? Right, so that's the issue with B2B, right? So when you sort of look at a B2B model, you need to also think about that particular customer or that particular customer segment and sort of figure out how they are likely to treat you, right? So very often we ask questions in India, the segment that you're playing in, is their vested interest, right? Whenever you touch farm, because it is related to land, right, or real estate related to land, right, political influence becomes critical, right? Anywhere in the emerging world. Anywhere in the emerging world, and probably to some extent the developed world as well. Okay, so the question of vested interest comes in. You can have a B2B2C model. I mean, the ultimate customer is the C, but from a channel decision, you go through a intermediate business, right? Which is fine, but the intermediate business will pay you only if their customer pays you. Otherwise, you get stuck, right? Of course, you have the C2C now, or the peer-to-peer, right, which is what a lot of the fintech companies talk about, right? A lot of that is peer-to-peer, their customers. To some extent, they are also multi-sided markets, right? The number 5 there. You have 2 market segments, so you have to manage 2 sets of customers, right? I mean, it's not a new business model. It's just that in a world of e-commerce, m-commerce, hyper-locals, all that kind of thing, they are all multi-sided markets, right? If you thought about the traditional multi-sided market was a newspaper, right? On the one hand, the subscriber pays for it, and on the other hand, the advertiser pays for it, right? If you don't have one, you don't have the other, right? So, and of course, the Google is the prime example of someone who made it phenomenally successful, right? And then, of course, you have a combination, right? Some people will have a customer B2C segment plus a B2B segment, right? And then there are challenges associated with it, because you need a separate canvas for each of them, right? Your customer segment is very different, and how you deal with those 2 different customer segments is completely different, right? Okay? I should have had it the other way, but anyway, that's the definition of value proposition. You can read it for yourself. What is the benefit that your customer gets, right? That's really the value proposition. Right? So, what could be some of the value propositions, right? Your product is new, it doesn't exist, right? And it does happen, right? It does happen that we come up with products that didn't exist. Couple of examples. Oh, yeah. Okay, this definition you can read for yourself. Sorry, I'm really managing 2 slides, right? One for me to see. Yeah, this value proposition, you can just read that for yourself. Okay, this is fine. Value proposition, right? What you have come up with is new, it doesn't exist. Right? I guess you have a couple of examples, even out of IIT. I suppose Detect is a good example, right? It's a product that doesn't exist, right, to test the fatigue of oil pipelines, right? So again, something that doesn't exist. Or it could be performance, in which case maybe we could think about planners. ROVs exist, but in that particular segment that they chose to play with, you guys know these companies? These are IIT companies, right? Planners does remote operated vehicles underwater, right? Right? They do it in the shallow segment. Most ROVs in the global space are deep water. They also have a business model difference. Most people just sell the ROVs, and other people operate it. In the case of planners, they had a business model decision to do a service model at least in India, right? So that was a conscious business model decision. And performance, right? And the performance, I would say, in the case of planners, is performance for the cost of the equipment. Right? They are able to make it a lot cheaper because it's Indianized. Right? And a lot of the things were built up, ground up from the IT incubation, which they are. Right? They have graduated, right, obviously, from the IT space. Right? So performance is an example, right? It's something that performs better. And I have a venture number 4, and you could say, why are we in electric vehicles for auto? Right? Mahindra has come up with it. Any of the big players can come up with it, right? And the reason we are competitive, or at least that's what our potential customers say, which includes the Ola, Ubers, big baskets, is we have a range of 300 kilometers. And if you look at the Mahindra's advertised range, it's less than 110, right? Their speed is around 30 kilometers an hour. We can take it to 70 kilometers an hour, and we can also boost it to 110 kilometers an hour if it's required, right? We won't do it for most functions. You don't need that kind of speed, right? So whether the autos will go up a slope with all the big basket boots in its back, is a question, right? So again, the way we evaluated the value proposition is our performance is better. So we fight on one single value proposition against everybody else, it's on performance, right? And if you can do it, and if you can do it well, you will win in the market, right? So that's an example where we are actually working on, and when we go through the whole exercise, right, trying to convince investors, I will tell you the different issues when we look at the rest of the business model canvas. When we are convincing investors, that's the single biggest point that we track, performance, right? We can charge hours in 2 hours, most others take overnight to charge, right? Others need infrastructure to charge, we can charge it in a normal 15 things because the infrastructure conversion is within the vehicle.
So I have a question, like you are comparing with Mahindra, suppose Tesla is there, right? So how is the...
Okay, so Tesla is, you need an infrastructure, right, to charge it. You take full night to charge it, right? We can charge it in 2 hours in normal power point, right? That's also performance. I don't need infrastructure that Tesla needs, right? There's a uniqueness, and I've learned this because I spent so much time learning about it in electric vehicle, and I also know the challenges that Ather goes through. The issue in electric is whenever you use a lot of power, right? So why are we in autos? They don't need that much power. They're not going to rev the auto to like Ather, right, which is a performance mine, right? So the issue Ather had was if they claim the range was 100 or whatever, I can't remember it, right? All the people who bought revved it up, and therefore they get 50. So they said your range is overstated, right? But that's because they revved it up, right? So, and this is a constant issue with electric, which is why we are able to promise 30 kilometer range, because we know in auto we have restricted the speed, they're never going to rev it, right? And in fact, it doesn't carry cargo, it's a lighter load. It would even give them 350 range. So each of it is a comparison, right? So when you talk about performance, you also need to measure each and everything of it, right? And of course, when it comes to electric, it's cheaper to operate. It's much cheaper than diesel, less than 10%, right? So you need to weigh off the, the total cost may be high, but the total cost in use is much lower, right? If you can manage all the other performance parameters. Right? So performance is a big thing, right? Customization. If you go and buy SAP to implement in your company, whether you're a small company or a big company, you can actually buy SAP, right? But SAP off the shelf is completely useless unless it's customized to the organization, right? And that's why all these consultants make a ton of money, right? With the implementations of these big companies, right? If you think about it, this is what helped Infosys, Wipro, and all our IT majors, become global companies, right? Because of the huge consulting element right? So customization is a big deal, right? So gets the job done. This is a very hard example. The only examples I can think of is like a Rolls-Royce engine. I mean, if you are flying a plane, you either buy Rolls-Royce or you buy GE, right? I think there's a Chinese company that's built aircraft engines, but almost either of these two engines or nothing else, right? It gets the job done, right? Because the risk of engine is so high, right? If the engine fails, the aircraft fails, right? And we just had one Lion Air crash just a few days ago, right? So the risk is so high. So if you are a company that gets the job done, you're set for life until somebody challenges you. And challenging these companies are very, very hard. It's one of the more reliable business propositions, right? They are very expensive to build, but once you get there, they are very hard to disrupt. And I won't include Facebook in that category. My view is Facebook will be disrupted. And probably the signs of it are already beginning to take place. There is a company called Renola that presented at Kiritsu, Singapore last month. This month, it's still November. And they are a private social media. And they sell those solutions to the Nikes of the world. Who doesn't want to go through Facebook? Why should they? It's their customer, right? Or their followers, right? So my sense is Facebook would be disrupted at some point in time, right? Of course, Facebook themselves know it, which is why they bought Instagram and WhatsApp, right? Some of that is a defensive strategy because they know that they will be disrupted. Okay. Design, some of these other examples, you're less likely to come across, but just for the sake of completeness, a watch that is designed by whatever, right? In my case, Bulgari, that's a design. The Swiss make money out of design. Handbags, again, nowadays times are not so good. I don't know if retail is doing well. Retail in Singapore used to do extremely well because all the Indonesian aristocracy used to come to Singapore to buy, right? So design, right? Design, brand, they're all related, right? Why would I want to wear a Bulgari instead of a Casio or whatever, right? So, right, or a Swatch instead of a whatever, right? One of the cheaper watches, right? These are all brand conscious. Cost or risk reduction, okay. Sometimes your solution actually enable your customer to reduce costs, right? I'm blanking out now on an example. I'm sure an example will come to me, right? Going back to my auto example, right? Our auto example, not the cost of the auto, but if they have an auto fleet, right? Why is Ola talking to us, right? The reason they're talking to us is their overall fleet will actually incur less cost. Running cost goes down by a lot. So our solution per se is not cheap, right? So I'm not fighting on price, right? I'm not fighting on price. I'm fighting on the fact that I'm competing against a diesel solution which is a lot more expensive, right? Operating costs, okay? Then of course you get to the debate of whether the higher capital costs justifies it, right? We think the maths justify it, but at the end of the day the customer decides, right? Okay, and having something accessible. Despite all the innovation in the world and everything online, and you can buy anything online today, even in India, right? We still have a nuts and spices store down the road, right? And I still make the effort to walk down there and buy whatever I need. And down the road this way, Sri Krishna Sweets has started, and literally I will walk there, right, when I run out of snacks at tea time, right, to sort of go and buy something, right? Why? They're accessible, right? I don't need to sit down, go into a computer, put my credit card, all that kind of stuff, right? So sometimes just being accessible is an extremely valuable value proposition. Right? Of course, from an incubator perspective, that's not the kind of thing that you're going to build, but think about it, right? But why are some of them having markets? Right? I could relate it to convenience, that is sort of related. Right? what is convenient? I don't know how many people still buy newspaper. I know a lot of people in India do. It's the only country, I think, where newspaper circulation goes up. Almost everywhere else people don't buy newspaper. I don't buy newspaper, I read everything online. It's convenient, right? I don't even bother to check if it would be cheaper if I bought a hard copy, right? I don't even check, right? Because it's just so convenient. I travel so much. I don't have to worry about whether I cancel my newspaper, I stopped it for the period I'm away. I don't have to worry about it, right? I have what I need on the book. Okay, this is the value proposition canvas. You have it in front of you. So I'm going back to my question on fit, right? You create a product or a service. Now this product or service must actually fulfill the customer's job, otherwise it's worthless, right? So, for example, if I go back to my the simulator example, right? The product is a simulator, and what is the customer's job? It's training surgeons, right? In our case, orthopedic surgeons, right? They need to be trained. So there is a job that it does, okay? Now there are alternatives to a simulator, right? You can have a dead body, a cadaver, right? What is the problem with the cadaver? Hard to get. It's banned in Japan and Sweden recently, right? 3 is there's not much to go around, so 20 students will stand around, or 10 students. My brother-in-law stopped medicine now, but he says when he was around there were 10 students. I think it's now 20 students, right? So you stand around a camera, right? So it's not accessible. So how much practice do you get? But with a simulator, you get a lot of practice. And the good thing is you don't use the kit at all. The saw is not used at all, right? It's simulated. It's real life experience without actually wasting the needle a few times, right? Or the drill a few times, right? So it needs to solve a job, right? The customer needs a solution, it needs to solve a job, right? But the problem with this the customer is not just looking to solve a job, right? Go back to my example of the effective microorganisms. It was actually solving a job, right? The customer can actually use it and create a lot more value, but they were still not buying in quantities that they had to buy for us to justify being in the business, right? And why might that be? They may have no emotional attachment, or they may have fears that even though I buy this, the weather is going to destroy my crop anyway, right? Vested interest, the fertilizer guy says, look, this is bad for you. I mean, any number of things, right? So you almost need to understand the profile of the customer, right? When you are developing your product and service, and then you have to test it with the customer. Okay? Now, if you pick up that particular book, the Value Proposition Canvas book, it talks to you, it gives you a whole lot of examples. And in a workshop, I would go through it. A whole lot of examples of how you might test what is your customer's real need. And that's what you need to solve. Otherwise, you don't have a fit there. Right? In fact, I'm sort of talking about, right? So the customer, his job, he has certain pains, right? And there are certain gains that he wants out of it, right? These are the 3 things, and each of it is separate. You always need to think of each of these as separate. Customer job is also, is he the owner buying for himself? Right? Is he a manager? You think about it, some of the managers buying microorganisms, they have vested interests. If I'm not giving him a kickback on the side, he's got no interest in even, he will speak to you because the boss says speak to them, but he has got no interest to pursue that discussion further, right? Sometimes you really need to understand what's in the mind of the customer, right? And therefore, is this the customer you want to address, right? So the customer segmentation question becomes very important. right? So that's at the first level, right? The customer jobs, customer pains, right? What is this pain, and is your product actually solving those pains? Okay? And a customer may want something, right? They may be struggling to improve something, struggling to improve maybe factory productivity or reduce utility costs, right? Reduce electricity costs because the cost is going up and therefore they need to run the machines a lot more efficiently, right? So they're looking for a gain. They may be looking for a solution that you give them to reduce the use of electricity, right? So that's why you have the innovation around 4.0, you have the innovation around, I guess a good example is Swada in IIT, which is reducing the cost of electricity, right? So that the valves operate in such a way that if the room is empty, you're not using any of that chiller, right? So that's a kind of a good example, right? And how you could overall reduce the cost of this, right? So there are gains that somebody is looking for, right? The gain that they're looking for is cheaper cost of power, right? And Swada, I guess if you know the company that sort of manages these chillers and more efficient use of electricity, then or more efficient use of air conditioning, which is often the biggest the biggest electricity cost for most buildings, right, including this space. And anyway, IIT Madras Research Park is one of their customers, right? I think they were the beta customers, right? So you're here, I'm talking about slightly, again the fit question, right? I'm talking about a slightly different fit to what I was talking about when I started the presentation, right? About paper fit, market fit, and business model fit. Here, you're getting a very specific of matching your value propositions to your customer sector, right? And the only way you can do it is by analyzing your customer profile. And you need to be almost at a micro level, right? Otherwise, you don't quite get it, right? And then you're trying to fit. But of course, you can't solve all their pains. You can't meet all their gains. So you have to strike this balance, because then you would be building the platinum mousetrap that nobody will buy or nobody will pay for, because the price would be too expensive, right? So you have to design a mousetrap within the customer's ability to pay or willingness to pay, right? But at the same time address as many of their pains, as many of the gains they're looking for, and emotionally that they will actually buy, right? Sometimes I come from a consulting background. I was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, not for consulting, accounting related, right? As they say, there is a real reason why a client chooses you, and often it's emotional rather than the pure offering, right? It's always a bit of a beauty parade, right? I mean, they call 3 firms and make all the presentations and all that kind of stuff, and people would say there's really not all that much difference between the big 4. But why do they choose you? It's often the emotional connect, right? The relationship connect is why somebody actually hires you, right? So to some extent, you need to almost read the mind of your customer, right, as you're developing your products, right? There is a real reason they buy. There's a reason they buy, right? That if it's not one of the big 4, they have a hard time explaining, but there's a real reason they buy, right? So you actually need to get into the customer's head. Okay. I've sort of talked through the middle bit of this, right, in my earlier slides, right? And therefore, you only find fit when your customer gets excited about your value proposition. When I say excited, it's not just interview, yeah, sounds like a good idea, but when they want to pay for it, they want to co-develop with you, they want to take your beta, right, and run the beta with you. And I've made such offers to some of the IIT teams, right, in areas of my interest, right, and it tends to be in the area of farms, solar, energy saving, all that kind of stuff. You can tell from there, from some of the examples that I put on the board. And I said, look, if you want to test it, I have 1 acre in Injapakam, can you come and put your device there? We can see if it works, right? So that's what excites, when a customer gets excited, then you know that your value proposition has got some place to go, right? And of course, the flip side of the problem is your customer is judge, jury, and executioner, right? And that's what happened to us with my simulator business. We focus singularly on Johnson & Johnson because they have 70% market share. Why would I go to anybody else, right? And for their own issues, right, they were our executioners, right? We almost died until we pivoted the business model, right? So we have to change the customer segment, right? So if you think about it, that's as fundamental as it comes, right? You sort of decide, so you sort of say, okay, there is perhaps the OEM market, the Johnson & Johnsons of the world, but maybe that's not the market that we want to go after. Can we go after the residency trading market, right? It's a fundamental change. And then you've got to think about what is the value proposition for this lot of people and what is the other business model needs, where the resources going to come from, right? Because one of the big things is the ability to raise more resources. The ability to raise more money is critical if a startup is to become a unicorn, right, a $1 billion company, your ability to raise more money is critical. And if you can't do that, you'll never get there. And therefore, you are then hoping and praying somebody will buy you out quickly. Okay. Any questions on the value proposition before I get quickly into business model timeless?